Hey, it's Keisha. Welcome and welcome back. We are now on our next reading in the Aquarian. It's chapters 178 and 179. So let us begin by first closing our eyes, taking a deep breath in and letting it out. Another deep breath in and out. And just feel your attention pulling back from earthly cares and concerns, beginning to focus inward on the self. And feel the outside world just drifting away. Nothing's left but the supremacy of the self. With each breath, fill the self to overflowing. Feel your energy and attention becoming more and more present. If you feel like you're attached to anything or anything is attached to you, just release those cords and let them go back to source. Focused and unfettered is where we want it to be. And now see a column of white light coming down over us. Breathe in that light. Feel it quickening the cells of the body, filling the spaces between the cells, dissolving anything that's not like into a self. Anything that's not of the light now drifts away. Focused, unfettered, and full is where we should be now. Breathe that in. And now lift up the column of light, lifting up higher and higher out of the earthly plane, out of worldly concerns, out of earthly perception and earthly reality. Lifting up higher and higher into our space of pure oneness, space of all-knowing, the space of love. And coming to a comfortable seat in the grove. When your heart and mind are ready, gently open your eyes. (178) and 179. Apollo, with the silent brotherhood of Greece, was sitting in a Delphinian grove. The oracle had spoken long and loud. The priests were in the sanctuary, and as they looked, the oracle became a blaze of light. It seemed to be on fire and all consumed. The priests were filled with fear. They said, "A great disaster is come. Our gods are mad. They have destroyed our oracle." But when the flames had spent themselves, a man stood in the auric pedestal and said, "God speaks to man, not by an oracle of wood and gold, but by the voice of man." The gods have spoken to the Greeks in kindred tongues through the images made by man. But God, the One, now speaks to man through Christ the only Son, who was and is and evermore will be. This oracle shall fail. The living oracle of God, the One, will never fail. Apollo knew the man who spoke. He knew it was the Nazarene who once had taught the wise men in the Acropolis and had rebuked the idol worshippers upon the Athenian beach. And then in a moment, Jesus stood before Apollo in the silent brotherhood and said, "Behold, for I have risen from the dead with gifts for men. I bring to you the title of your vast estate. All power in heaven and earth is mine. To you I give all power in heaven and earth. Go forth and teach the nations of the earth the gospel of the resurrection of the dead and of the eternal life through Christ, the love of God made manifest to men." And then he clasped Apollo's hands and said, "My human flesh was changed to higher form by love divine, and I can manifest in flesh or in the higher planes of life at will. What I can do, all men can do. Go preach the gospel of the omnipotence of man." Then Jesus disappeared. But Greece and Crete and all the nations heard. Claudius and Juliet, his wife, lived on the Palatine in Rome, and they were servants of Tiberius, but they had been in Galilee. He walked with Jesus by the sea. They had walked with Jesus by the sea, had heard his words and seen his power, and they believed that he was the Christ made manifest. Now Claudius and his wife were on the Tiber in a little boat. A storm swept from sea. The boat was wrecked, and Claudius and his wife were sinking down to earth, or sinking down to death. And Jesus came and took them by the hands and said, Claudius and Juliet, arise and walk with me upon the waves. And they arose and walked with him upon the waves. 1,000 people saw the three walk on the waves and saw them reach the land, and they were amazed. And Jesus said, You men of Rome, I am the resurrection and the life. They that are dead shall live, and many that shall live will never die. By mouth of gods and demigods God spoke unto your fathers long ago. But now he speaks to you through perfect man. He sent his Son, the Christ, in human flesh to save the world. And as I lifted up from the watery grave and saved the servants of Tiberius, so Christ will lift up the sons and daughters of the human race, yea, every one of them, from darkness and from graves of carnal things to light and everlasting life. I am the manifest of love raised from the dead. Behold my hands, my feet, my side, which carnal men have pierced. Claudius and Juliet, whom I have saved from death, are my ambassadors to Rome. And they will point the way and preach the gospel of the holy breath and of the resurrection of the dead. And that was all he said, but Rome and all of Italy heard. The priests of Heliopolis were in their temple met to celebrate the resurrection of their brother Nazarite. They knew that he had risen from the dead. The Nazarite appeared and stood upon a sacred pedestal on which no man had ever stood. This was an honor that had been reserved for him who would first demonstrate the resurrection of the dead. And Jesus was the first of all the human race to demonstrate the resurrection of the dead. When Jesus stood upon the sacred pedestal, the Master stood and said, All hail! The great bells of the temple rang, and all the temple was ablaze with light. And Jesus said, All honor to the masters of this temple of the sun. In flesh of man there is the essence of the resurrection of the dead. This essence, quickened by the holy breath, will raise the substance of the body to a higher tone, and make it like the substance of the bodies of the planes above, which human eyes cannot behold. There is a holy ministry in death. The essence of the body cannot be quickened by the holy breath until the fixed is solved. The body must disintegrate, and this is death. And then upon those pliant substances God breathes, just as he breathes upon the chaos of the deep when worlds were formed. And life springs forth from death. The carnal form is changed to form divine. The will of man makes possible the action of the holy breath. When will of man and will of God are one, the resurrection is a fact. In this we have the chemistry of mortal life, the ministry of death, the mystery of deific life. My human life was wholly given to bring my will to tune with the deific will. When this was done, my earth tasks all were done. And you, my brothers, know full well the foes I had to meet. You know about my victories in Gethsemane, my trials in the courts of men, my death upon the cross. You know that all my life was one great drama for the sons of men, a pattern for the sons of men. I live to show the possibilities of man. What I have done, all men can do, and what I am, all men shall be. The masters looked, the form upon the sacred pedestal had gone, but every temple priest and every living creature said, Praise God. Now the apostles were at home in Galilee. The women tarried in Judea until the Pentecost. And Peter, James, and John, and Andrew, Philip, and Nathanael were in Capernaum. They joined with Jonah and with Zebedee, and in their boats went out to fish. They toiled all night, and when the morning came, they had no fish. And as they neared a shore, a man stood on the shore and said, How many fish have you? And Peter said, None. Again the man called out and said, A school of fish is passing now upon the right side of your boat. Cast out your net. They cast their net, and it was filled. And John exclaimed, It is the Lord who stands upon the shore. And Peter plunged into the sea and swam to shore. The other men brought in the net, and it contained 153 fish, and yet it did not break. And Jesus said, My children, let us break our fast together. They found some living coals on the beach, and Peter brought and dressed the fish, and they had some bread. And when the meal was prepared, they broke their fast, and Jesus ate of both the fish and bread. Now, after breakfast, all the men were sitting on the beach, and Jesus said to Peter, Do you love the Lord with all your heart? Do you love your neighbor as you love yourself? And Peter said, Yea, Lord. I love my Lord, my God, with all my heart. I love my neighbor as I love myself. And Jesus said, Then feed my sheep. And then he said to James, Do you love her, the holy breath, with all your heart? And do you love your neighbor as you love yourself? And James replied, Yea, Lord, I love the holy breath with all my heart. I love my neighbor as I love myself. Then Jesus said, Protect my sheep. And then he said to John, Do you love the Christ, the love divine made manifest, with all your heart? And do you love your neighbor as you love yourself? And John replied, Yea, Lord, I love the Christ with all my heart. I love my neighbor as I love myself. And Jesus said, Then feed my lambs. Then Jesus rose and said to Peter, Follow me. And Peter followed him. When Peter saw that John was following him, he said to Jesus, Lord, behold, John follows you. What shall he do? Now Peter did not hear the master when he said to John, Then feed my lambs. And Jesus spoke to Peter, and he said, It matters not to you what John shall do, not even though I will that he remain until I come again. Just do your duty. Follow me. And Jesus passed, and they knew not where he went. The news soon spread through all of Capernaum that Jesus had arisen from the dead, that he had walked with his disciples by the sea and ate with them the morning meal. The multitudes came forth to see. Now Peter, James, and John, together with the other men who had been called to be apostles of the Lord, went to the mountains near Capernaum to pray. And as they prayed, the Master came. They saw him, and they talked with him. He said to them, The Pentecost is near at hand. Go to Jerusalem, and I will meet you there. And as he talked, a multitude of people came. They saw the Lord. They said, Behold, for now we know that he, the Nazarene, has risen from the dead, for we have seen him face to face. So, Jesus still on his grand tour. He now goes to Greece to speak to the Oracle at Delphi, or to Apollo, and ushers in a new era, right? One where God speaks to man not through the oracle of wood and gold, but by the voice of man. And the oracle, he says, the oracle shall fail. The living oracle of God, the one, will never fail. So we have a turning away from the original practices of going to the oracle, and we'll now hear God as the voice of man, each unto ourselves. Which harkens back to, the Council of the Sages, when we talked about what was the New Age to bring. The New Age calls for liberty, the kind that makes each man his own priest, enables him to go alone and lay his offerings on the shrine of God. No longer do we need an intercessor or someone else to speak to God on our behalf. We can go directly to him. And then he says, I am the resurrection and the life. Okay. I am the resurrection and the life. They that are dead shall live, and many that shall live will never die. And then again, just after that, he says, I am the manifest of love raised from the dead, which I think is another poetic way of saying I am the resurrection and the life. And then, so 178, chapter 178, verses 36 through 42, we get a very intense spiritual, quantum physical explanation of how to transmute human flesh to form divine. Right? There exists within every man the essence of the resurrection, because Christ has brought the love of God to earth and taken the love of God back, and established himself as the love of God made manifest and proven the resurrection. That's why he says, I've come as the pattern for the sons of men. That is now seated in our consciousness and available to each of us. This essence, quickened by holy breath, will raise the substance of the body to a higher tone. So he's talking about raising the vibration of the body to such a degree that we can no longer see it in a third degree plane. He doesn't say fourth degree by name, but he says, we'll make it will make it like the substance of the bodies of the plane above, where human eyes cannot see. So in our third degree or third dimensional existence, we can't see. But if we go one level up in the fourth dimension, in the third dimension, we can see, right? Linked with height. That's those three dimensions. As we move into the fourth dimension, we can't see that, but we'd be raising our vibration to that level. There's the holy ministry of death, the act of, so in order to resurrect the soul, we must first deal with the mortal coil. And so the holy ministry of death is that holy breath can't come into existence until the body is fixed, until we resolve the body. And so it must disintegrate. And then upon the finer ethers of the soul, holy breath is breathed, and that reanimates the life out of death. And so there we have carnal form change to form divine. And I love that when the will of God makes possible the action of the holy breath, when will of man and will of God are one, resurrection is the fact. So will of God is stable and steady and always present. It is us who needs to rise to that level by saying, God's will be done, not my will be done. And so as we raise to meet God at God's vibration, then we will achieve the resurrection. And in this we have the chemistry of mortal life, the ministry of death, the mystery of deific life. This phrase, I live to show the possibilities of man. When I read that this time around, it reminded me instantly of Walter Russell, a 20th century genius who was he was top of his field in so many areas and came up with so many ideas that we in our culture have we continue to use this day, though with some minor differences. I encourage you, if you haven't, there's a fantastic book, The Man Who Knew the Secrets of the Universe by Glenn Clark, and it's about Walter Russell. If you haven't heard of him, I encourage you to look him up. He's quite an interesting figure, he and Lau Russell. Speaking of patterns of the sons of men, Walter Russell is someone that I look to and think, I want to be like that. I want to explore and express all of my potential at such a high degree that it makes a lasting impression and leaves that behind as legacy. And then we come to the final act here where Jesus meets the apostles on the seashore after a night of fishing where they haven't caught anything, and tells them to look out and cast their nets on the right side, right, to take right action, or to use their intuition and follow that guidance. And there they meet with such abundance. And it's interesting that they list out specifically 153 fish, because if you go by the numerology, 1 is a new beginning, 5 is change, 3 is communication. 1, 5, and 3 added together come to 9, which is completion and service. So the idea that now that Christ has risen, the disciples are ready to go out, and it is a new beginning for the world and for them individually as they go out to preach the gospel. And it's come through and will enable even greater change. And they'll do that through communicating and sharing the word of the gospel. Peace be unto all. And, it's now time for them to take their service out into the world. So 153 fish is what that represents and why that number specifically resonates. This short section where he talks to Peter, James, and John was particularly sweet, not in general, but also for me personally. When I was ordained as part of the service, the question that I was asked prior to being formally ordained was, Keisha, do you love the Lord your God with all your heart? And do you love your neighbor as yourself? And I answered, I do. And their reply was, well, then feed my sheep. And we went through the 3. Do you love the holy breath with all your heart? Do you love your neighbor as yourself? Yes. Well, then protect my sheep. Do you love the Christ with all your heart? Yes. Then feed my lambs. So it's particularly sweet to read that here again. I'd forgotten that was here. So we have force, wisdom, and love being asked to formally teach. And it's interesting because Jesus is speaking to each of them at the same time, which we get in this little exchange with Peter, where it says Jesus said to Peter, "Follow me," and John is coming along as well, but Peter doesn't hear that Jesus said to John, "Feed my lambs and follow me," right? So he's speaking to each of them at the same time. And when Peter sees that John is following, he's like, "Hey, what's Peter doing? I thought you just said me." And Jesus is like, "Hey, it doesn't matter what John's doing. Just do your duty and follow me," right? So don't worry about what other people are doing. They have been called unto their purpose, right? And we don't know what that is. So it's not important what they do. What's important is that you follow the direction that I have given you, which in this case is follow me. And so that's what we should each be doing. We should each be following him according to the purpose in which we are called. And there you have it. So we will come back, and just for reference, our next reading, 180 through 182, will be our conclusion. So we have that to look forward to. I look forward to seeing you in our next reading, and I will love you in the meantime. Bye.